Hello. In this recording from our Justia webinar, Landing a Clerkship, a Guide for Law Students, Keisha Stokes Huff discusses the responsibility of law clerks, explores the career and networking benefits of pursuing a clerkship, while providing an overview of the clerkship application and hiring process, including practical tips for securing a judicial clerkship. Remember, if you'd like to see more Justia videos on law practice and legal marketing, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
Thank you so much, Nina, for that very generous introduction. Hi, everyone. I was really excited about this presentation today. I'll start with sharing a little bit of background about myself. When I started in law school, I really had no information, no idea about clerkships and clerking and what that was. I learned about it from my classmates discussing opportunities after law school. And it really was one of my professors, Charles Freed, who encouraged me to pursue a clerkship. I approached him about it because he had been a Solicitor General during the Reagan administration. So I knew that he knew about clerkships. And so I asked him, what is this clerkship thing that I keep hearing about? And he said, well, it allows young attorneys to work very closely with judges to learn about the operations of the court system. And I think you'd be great for it and you should consider applying. And I shared with him my desire to come back to the South, being originally from Mississippi, to do good work on behalf of the people who live here. And so he really encouraged me to pursue clerkship opportunities in the Deep South. So after law school, my first clerkship was with Judge Mickle of the Northern District of Florida. And Judge Mickle was a legend in Florida, in the Florida legal community. He was the first Black student to graduate from the University of Florida. And then he went to law school there and became a judge locally in Gainesville, Florida. And so it was an honor to be able to work so closely with him and to learn from him. So I worked for Judge Mickle for 2 years. He's since passed away, but I learned so much from him about how to be a good lawyer. And after working with Judge Mickle, I clerked for Judge Stewart on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. So for this clerkship, I was based in Shreveport, Louisiana, and we would travel to New Orleans for oral arguments at the Fifth Circuit Courthouse. So I have a lot of experience at the trial court level with the district court, but also at the appellate level. And I'm excited to share with you the information that I learned as a clerk and information that can be useful for you as you consider pursuing this as an opportunity. So let's start with a poll. What is your level of interest in clerking? If you can share if you're just curious about clerkships, if you're definitely applying, or you're not currently interested. And thanks for participating. This will help me try to tailor the presentation to the level of interest that I'm seeing. Okay, our results, 70% just curious. So I hope the information that I'm able to share with you today will be useful to you as you explore clerkships. 26% definitely applying, 4% not currently interested, but maybe some of what we talk about today will encourage you to pursue this as a potential opportunity. So for our agenda today, we're going to start with talking about the clerkship hiring process. Then we'll go into law clerk responsibilities. I'll give an overview of the federal courts and the state courts. And then we'll finish with talking about the rewards of clerking, how it can be beneficial to you in your careers. And then we'll go to questions and answers after that. So let's start with the clerkship hiring process. So I want to give an overview of the application process. The first resource when it comes to clerkship hiring is actually the federal judicial hiring plan, which you can find information about through Oscar. Oscar is a website that's managed by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. The acronym stands for online system for clerkship application and review. To access Oscar, you'll go to the website oscar.uscourts.gov. Oscar.uscourts.gov. And what Oscar does is it's a website that you can use to directly apply to judges for clerkships and then learn information about which judges are interested in accepting clerks at which times. As you know, from my experience, I had one clerkship that was 2 years and another clerkship that was 1 year. So sometimes judges are only hiring for clerks every 2 years or every other year. Other judges hire for clerks every year. So if you access Oscar, it will show you which judges are accepting clerkship applicants through that system. And Oscar also sets a schedule for when judges who participate in the hiring plan can begin considering applications and can begin interviewing. So for this year, the Oscar hiring plan is going to start on June 9th with accepting applications that judges can begin reviewing. And then interviews for clerkships will begin June 10th. So judges who participate in the plan will start reviewing their applications on June 9th, and then they'll start interviewing on June 10th of this year. Those dates change every year. So when you're considering applying for a clerkship, just go back to Oscar for the year that you're considering applying, and then it will have the schedule and timeline for you. But it's important to note that participation in the federal judicial hiring plan is optional for the judges. So there are some judges who don't participate in the plan and they set their own schedule for when they'll start considering applications and reviewing applications. So that's kind of where we get into off plan hiring. I'm going to use the term off plan hiring for everything that isn't part of the federal judicial hiring plan. So, if you're applying to a judge who doesn't participate in Oscar, participate in the plan, then that would be part of off plan hiring. Um, the federal judicial hiring plan only applies to law students. So if you're applying for a clerkship after law school, maybe you get one clerkship and you're working in one clerkship and then you're applying for another clerkship, which I did. For that second clerkship, then you wouldn't participate in the hiring plan anymore. That would be off plan hiring. And if you're applying to non-federal judges, then that will also be off plan hiring because it wouldn't be part of the federal judicial hiring plan. So with off plan hiring for clerkships, you can submit your application at any time, or if you follow up directly with the court to see when they're accepting applicants, then you would apply according to that judge's or that court schedule, which is separate from the judicial hiring plan. But whether you're participating in the federal hiring plan or you're submitting in off-plan hiring, the application materials and expectations for the application and interview process are pretty much the same. For your application materials, you want to have a cover letter, expressing your interest in clerking for that particular judge. You want to have a strong writing sample. So usually something that you prepared during law school where you do some thorough legal analysis is what they're looking for your writing sample. So that might be if you worked on a law review while you were in school and you prepared a note, then you can use that. If you did a legal research memo during law school or during the summers while you were doing an internship, then you can use something like that. But they're really looking to see your writing ability, your legal analysis demonstrated in your writing sample. You'll also need to provide generally a transcript. An unofficial transcript is usually acceptable. You don't generally have to send your formal transcript. So an unofficial transcript is fine. And then you also want to have 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And these recommendation letters are distinct from a recommendation letter that you would get for a general job application. For a simple job application, you're expecting a reference to just say, he's reliable, he came to work on time, but it doesn't have to be particularly thorough for a standard job. But for a clerkship application, what the judges are really looking for is how do you as a candidate compare to other potential candidates or other students that your reference has worked with in the past. So for a reference letter from a professor, something that would be really strong is something like, I enjoyed working with Keisha as a first year law student. Of all the first year law students that I've worked with in 20 years of my career as a professor, I would say that Keisha, has shown strong writing ability, or she's in the top 10% of students that I work with, or something like that. Something thorough and detailed about you in particular. So for these letters, it's important to seek a reference from someone who knows something about you that they can convey substantively in the letter. In addition to professors, I think it's great to get reference letters from partners or attorneys that you worked with during internships, because that's also another practical reference of your work ethic, your skills when it comes to work, in addition to having the academic references. If you did a clinic while in law school, I think it could be really impactful to have a letter from someone you work with in the clinic, one of your clinical advisors, potentially a client who worked with you and had a good experience working with you in the clinic. That's another way to show, your work ethic, your empathy, your commitment to the work. And I think that can be useful for a clerkship application. So I want to give some tips for the interview. So after you apply for a clerkship, if you're participating in the federal judicial hiring plan, then you've gone to Oscar, you've identified the judges that you're applying to, you've submitted your application, and then you're selected for an interview. The first thing I want to discuss is really the objectives of the interview at that point. Um, Usually, when a judge takes the time to interview a candidate, then it means that they've considered their application materials. They understand that the person is qualified and has the ability to succeed and do well at the job. And so the focus of the interview becomes, is this someone I can work with well, someone I can work closely with over an extended period of time? Is this someone who's going to get along with the other people who work with me in chambers and in the courthouse? So I say a primary objective for you as a candidate interviewing for a clerkship is to put your best foot forward in showing that you're collegial, collaborative, that you're timely, that you have a strong work ethic. And those are the things that I would focus on. The interview is not necessarily a space where you should feel like you need to prove your academic ability or prowess, and focus instead on the interpersonal dynamic between yourself and the judge who's considering you, as well as the judge's staff members and other people who work in the courthouse. Something that I would encourage not only for your clerkship application, but just in general as a future attorney and working with the courts, is to always be polite, kind, collegial with all of the people who work in the courthouse. The courthouse is a small community of its own. You might not appreciate that the people who, the court security officers who are working with you, just allow you to gain access to the building. You go through the scanners and all that. But those court security officers also have a relationship with the judge. It's often a court security officer who also serves as a bailiff for the judge when the judge is holding court proceedings. So you want to be sure that you're leaving a positive impression with the court security officers, the clerks, other people that you happen to encounter when you go to the courthouse for an interview, because all of those people are part of the courthouse family that you'll be working with if you're accepted as a clerk. And they definitely share their opinions and views if they think that you're somebody that would be difficult for them to interact with or get along with. So, one tip is be nice to everyone. And that's true as well when you're in practice as an attorney. Scheduling with these interviews is something that can be challenging for law students. If you applied for a lot of clerkships and you're a great candidate, you might get a lot of interviews that you'll need to schedule in a short period of time. And sometimes clerkship applicants find it difficult to um, be upfront with judges if a particular date and time doesn't work for them when they're trying to schedule so many different interviews. I encourage you just to be upfront. If the judge asks to interview at a particular date and time, really try to make that work. However, if you have a conflict that makes that time difficult or not tenable, it's better to be upfront with the judge that, hey, I have an interview with another judge that I scheduled previously. Is it possible that I can get an additional day? You know, I really want to do this interview. And for the most part, when you're honest in that way, the judges will work with you as far as scheduling the interviews. But if you do have a lot of interviews and potential opportunities and you're not able to resolve those conflicts, then you may have to prioritize interviewing with the judge who you really want to work with versus interviewing with the judge at the same time who's not at the top of your list. So factor that in when it comes to scheduling your interviews. Um, Another thing to keep in mind with the interviews, if you're applying to clerkships that are in different parts of the country, just arranging your travel, your flights to be able to get to where you need to go, and ensuring that you have enough time to actually be where you need to be on time. What you don't want to do is kind of double book or book too closely together and you're late getting to one of your interviews, because that wouldn't be a good look and it wouldn't be a good use of the judge's time. So be considerate of their time as you go through the process of scheduling your interviews. In terms of format, um, the interviews tend to be long, relatively lengthy for clerkships. And that's because the interview is usually broken up into a few parts. Um, the key and the most important part of the interview is the actual time spent with the judge, where the judge is asking you questions and you have the opportunity to ask the judge some questions. So that's a key part of the interview. But generally, the judges also leave time for you as a clerkship applicant to have a discussion with the courts, with the judge's current clerks. And so just as you would, you know, go in and put your best foot forward with the judge himself or herself, you also want to leave a positive impression with the current clerks, because they'll also give their advice to the judge and their impressions to the judge about you as a candidate. So that's another part of the interview. Some interviews include a tour of the courthouse. During that tour, you might have the opportunity to interact with other staff, such as court clerks, maybe law clerks for other judges, um, court security officers, as I said. And so just be prepared that depending on the judge's interview format, there may be a lot of walking around the courthouse. So wear, you know, practical shoes, comfortable shoes for walking, and that there might be a lot of interaction with a lot of people beyond just the judge. And with all of those interactions, you want to do your best and put your best foot forward, be polite and collegial in all of your interactions. And usually the clerkship interview will include some lunch or something like that. Either including the judge, or the judge may just allow you to go to lunch with the judge's staff. So these interviews can be lengthy. They may take all of your day that day. So just plan to invest the amount of time in the interview to show who you really are as a potential colleague for the judge and the judge's staff. So, in terms of preparing for your interview, um, the judges don't expect you to know everything about them or to know everything about clerkships and what that will involve. But it does reflect well upon you if you do some research into who the judge is and the judge's background. So I think it's good to know, um, where the judge comes from. All of this is documented somewhere. You can check out their Westlaw, find the judge on Westlaw. You'll be able to access their decisions. It's good to at least have one or two decisions from the judge that you were impressed with, or cases that the judge worked on that you can maybe ask questions about. It shows that you've done your research and you're interested in the judge. I think it can also be good to identify some of the most important or most notable decisions of the last few years that the judge has worked on. And those decisions may come up in your interview in some way. And I think what the judges are looking for with that is that you're interested in working for them in particular. When we apply for clerkships and we apply to so many different people, we're not always aware or thoughtful about who the judges are as individuals when we're applying. But when you get to the time of your interview, you want to show that you have an interest in working for that person, and that you know something about them, and that you're going to bring skills and abilities to support them in doing their work. So now we're going to talk about law clerk responsibilities. What is it that law clerks actually do? Well, the duties of the law clerks will vary somewhat depending on what type of court it is. So, for purposes of this presentation, I'm going to talk about trial courts generally, and then I'll talk about appellate courts generally. So, for trial courts, the law clerks are going to primarily draft orders resolving pretrial and post-trial motions. So, your federal courts are federal courts of general jurisdiction in that they handle criminal cases, civil cases of various types. It's a wide range of cases that the federal courts consider, and the types of cases that they handle will vary a lot from place to place. Um, and so pretrial motions in a civil or criminal case might include things like motions to continue a proceeding or continue a trial, motions about evidence that will be presented at the trial, such as motions in limine, to exclude certain evidence. Um, Motions about witnesses and transporting witnesses and all of these things. So when you're a trial court judge and a trial court law clerk, you're resolving these motions all the time on a daily basis, or preparing drafts that you send to the judge that the judge will review in deciding whether and how to resolve the motion. So that's your primary responsibility. Post-trial motions include things like motion for a new trial, motion, you know, motions related to sentencing if it's a criminal case, and the person was convicted at trial, then you move into the sentencing process. And so there are lots of motions to handle throughout the trial court process. Law clerks also help the judges in actually preparing for trials and court hearings. There's a lot of work involved for clerks in just getting ready for a trial. Um, for the judge that I clerk for, and I think most judges, you would generally prepare a trial notebook, um, and that would have everything that the judge would need for the trial. With advances in technology, a lot of the information that you would include in a notebook, you can include on a judge's laptop. But the purpose for the law clerk is making sure that the judge has everything that they need to be able to conduct the trial. That includes like drafts of how the judge will introduce the case, drafts of what the judge will say to the jury, and preparing everything so the judge has it at hand in trying to administer the case. And the last thing is just managing the schedule of court activities for the judges. Um, Depending on the jurisdiction, the judges may have sittings in one place or may have sittings in multiple places. And the sitting is just the judge setting a schedule to be at court to resolve in person proceedings. The sitting can include trials, but it can also include things like sentencings and evidentiary hearings on motions. Motions to suppress, for instance. You could have a hearing, evidentiary hearing during one of your regular sittings. So when I worked for Judge Mickle, he would have sittings in Gainesville, which is where his chambers were, but then he would also have some sittings in Tallahassee. And that's just how the cases were distributed among the judges in the Northern District of Florida, that we had to have court in various locations. In other courts, you will only have sittings at your home court where you have your chambers, your home courthouse. But that can really vary depending on who you're clerking for. Appellate court clerkships are different. Most of your time is going to be spent drafting appellate opinions. And for the federal appeals courts, and we'll talk about them in detail a little bit more, most of your opinions are going to be decided by a panel of 3 judges. And the responsibility for writing will be distributed among the judges. And once a judge is assigned an opinion to write, then a clerk for the judge will receive responsibility for drafting that opinion. And so that will be the focus of your time. You'll also help judges prepare for oral arguments. One way that you'll do that is by drafting memos for the judges on the panel to review and help them make their decisions. So a lot of time is also spent on those bench memos. And lastly, you'll be reviewing drafts of opinions prepared by other clerks, editing those, making recommendations for your judge for how he should make a decision in those cases. So key terms for what law clerks do for judges. You work on orders, and those are written rulings or commands from the court. Generally, for trial courts, a lot of the decisions are in the form of an order. An opinion is a written statement explaining a reviewing court's decision in a case. So for appellate courts, most of the rulings that are going to come from the court are going to be those opinions, judicial opinions from the court. You may spend time working on dissenting opinions at the appellate court. So this is a written statement from one or more judges explaining why they disagree with the majority. And then lastly, your bench memorandum. This is a document summarizing the facts and key issues in a case. And as an appellate law clerk, you will spend time working on bench memoranda or bench memos to assist the judges in oral arguments and also in helping them make their decision on how to rule. So next we'll talk about the federal court system, and I'll try to just give an overview of that. So our federal court system basically has 3 levels. The United States District Court is our trial court. Um, The United States Court of Appeals is our intermediate appellate court. And at the highest level is the United States Supreme Court, which accepts cases at their own discretion. That's different from the other two courts. So people who want to access the Supreme Court submit a petition for writ of certiorari, and the Supreme Court justices review those and they decide which cases merit their attention and involvement. So for the district court clerkship structure, um, you generally have 2 to 3 law clerks. And that number can vary based on the other staff that the judge may have. Most judges will have a judicial assistant, and then their law clerks. Some judges may not have a judicial assistant, and then they may have a third law clerk just because of their staffing in their court. But generally speaking, it's 2 to 3 clerks for each United States district judge. If the judge is the chief judge for the district, then the judge may have an additional staff position for that reason. And it's up to the discretion of each judge whether they want to have term clerks or career clerks or a combination of both. So when I clerked for Judge Mickle, for instance, in the Northern District of Florida, he had one career clerk, permanent clerk. She's now a magistrate judge in Gainesville, which is amazing. And then he would have one term clerk, and that's where I came in as the clerk for a 2-year term. And he also had a judicial assistant. So we were the 3 staff for the judge. Other judges may have all term clerks, and some judges accept all new term clerks each year. Other judges might stagger when bringing on new term clerks. So, for instance, if a judge wanted to hire term clerks for a 2-year term, then he could have clerks starting one clerk starting 1 year, and the next clerk starting the next year, and the next clerk starting the next year, so that you have continuity. But other judges just start new clerks each year at the same time. And in terms of the roles of the district court clerks, your primary responsibility is assisting the judges with trial work, preparation for trial cases, the trials themselves, but also the pretrial rulings and the post-trial rulings. And in the United States District Court, because we handle civil cases and criminal cases of various types, then the types of things you work on will vary a lot. Criminal cases can range from things like guns and drugs to corruption. So there's a variety of things on the criminal side, and on the civil side, it's probably even broader in the types of things that you might work on. And I also wanted to highlight magistrate judges. Magistrate judges are part of the United States District Court system. The magistrate judges are appointed by U.S. district judges. They handle preliminary matters in cases. So, in a criminal case, a magistrate judge might handle a change of plea from not guilty to guilty. In civil cases, they do a lot in the federal system of managing the discovery process. Generally, in the federal system, if you're in a discovery dispute, then the first place you would go is to the magistrate judge to resolve it. The magistrate judges also prepare reports and recommendations for how the district court judges should resolve pending motions in certain cases that are assigned to them. So, for instance, they tend to take the lead on appeals of Social Security denials. They'll review those cases and prepare a report and recommendation to the United States District Judge. They also do a lot when it comes to habeas cases, and also prisoner cases that prisoners file and are litigating themselves pro se in the United States courts. Magistrate judges can also preside at trials with the consent of the party, and each magistrate judge will typically have 1 to 2 law clerks depending on their workload. Next, we'll talk about the appeals court clerkship structure. So at the appellate level, because there are fewer appellate judges and there are district court judges and they're handling a broad volume of cases, appellate court judges have more clerks. Generally, appellate court judges will have 4 to 5 law clerks. 5 law clerks, particularly if the judge is the chief judge of the circuit court, then the judge will have an additional staff member. I want to talk about clerks, law clerks, and staff attorneys and the distinction there. All of the courts of appeals have staff attorneys that work directly for the court and the court clerk. Um, and the judges within chambers also have law clerks. And so the staff attorneys, because they're hired by the court itself, their role is not limited to working with a particular judge. Instead, they review cases as they come in on appeal. And if a case is a simple one with an easy answer, that's usually determined by existing precedent. So there's not anything complex that needs to be decided or the law needs to be moved forward in a particular way, then the staff attorneys will prepare draft opinions for the judges to resolve those simple cases. And with those simple cases, they'll go ahead and present those drafts to the judges directly. They don't need to go to the law clerks, they'll go directly to the judges. And for a 3-judge panel, each judge will review. As long as the judges are in agreement with the staff attorney's proposed resolution of the case, and it's a simple case, then that's the end of the case. The judges can go ahead and decide the case, generally without oral argument, although some of our courts of appeals have oral argument for every case. But most of our courts of appeals don't do that, and simple cases like that are resolved by the staff attorneys without oral argument. But if a judge reviews the staff attorney's proposed resolution and they say, hey, I think there's more to this, I think this case actually merits oral argument and additional consideration, then all the judge has to do is say so, and then that case will be assigned to the panel for oral argument. So the distinction between law clerks and staff attorneys at the appellate level is staff attorneys are generally resolving simple cases, simple appellate cases, and the more complex cases go to the judges and the law clerks who handle those. In terms of roles and variations, one thing that's important to note is earlier I mentioned bench memos. For most of the federal appellate clerks, your bench memos will be pooled. So if you have 3 judges on a panel, you'll assign responsibility for one judge to assign a clerk to work on the bench memo for a particular case, and then that memo will be shared among all 3 of the judges. But some judges don't participate in that pool, and so they want each case they're considering to have their own clerk to draft a bench memo just for that judge. That's totally up to the judge's discretion and how they want to handle that. But of course, it means that if you work for a judge that doesn't participate in the pool of bench memoranda, then you're going to be handling more bench memo writing yourself just for your chambers because you're not participating in the circulated memos. So that's something to consider. And that's also something to consider asking about if you have an interview with an appellate judge. How do they handle the bench memo process? Do they circulate memos among the judges on the panel, or do you only prepare memos for just your particular judge? And United States Supreme Court clerkships. The United States Supreme Court clerkships are set up very similarly to the federal appellate clerkships. Each justice tends to have for around 4 law clerks. And they generally select candidates for U.S. Supreme Court law clerks from persons who previously served as law clerks to the federal to a federal appellate judge. That's not a requirement to be a United States Supreme Court law clerk, but that's just a tendency of where they tend to hire from. And there are certain judges, and you can Google this, who've been identified as quote unquote feeder judges to the United States Supreme Court. These are judges who've had, multiple or several of their clerks go on to be clerks at the United States Supreme Court. So if you're really interested in being a clerk at the United States Supreme Court level, then you might want to do some research into, those feeder judges, and what it is about their clerks that sets them apart. Sometimes it's that the judge has a very strong regard for his or her legal writing and legal analysis. And then that favors well on their clerks in getting additional opportunities at the United States Supreme Court level. At the Supreme Court level, you will assist the justices with resolving petitions for writ of certiorari. So that's just deciding whether a particular case is one that the court should rule upon or not. Once the case is accepted at the United States Supreme Court, and you will also assist the judges with preparing for oral argument and then also drafting the opinions that ultimately resolve the case. And we're going to do a brief overview of state courts because this is also an important area to consider when you're thinking about clerkships is applying to state courts. So for your state Supreme Courts, this is the highest court in the state. And the name can vary. For most states, it's just whatever the state is, Supreme Court, like Mississippi Supreme Court. In New York State, though, the highest court is the New York Court of Appeals. And so you would need to look into, for your jurisdiction, what is the highest court of the state. And the jurisdiction of the state Supreme Courts can vary. For instance, in Texas, the Texas Supreme Court is the highest state court when it comes to civil matters, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is the highest court when it comes to criminal matters. So depending on what you're interested in, you could apply for the highest court of a state based on your interest. It's important to note that state courts, including state Supreme Courts, can also issue decisions on areas of federal law. That federal legal issues can be heard and resolved in state courts. So in addition to getting experience in state law, you may also get experience in federal law by doing a state Supreme Court clerkship. And in terms of examples, all of the state Supreme Courts are prestigious and great, and they do important work. I know some law students who've been really interested in clerkships in Alaska for the Alaska Supreme Court because it's one of the newer states. They have a lot of questions of first impression. So, unlike some other states, more established case law, you might have the opportunity to really be creative in developing the law in a state like Alaska, where they're considering new issues for that state on a regular basis. Other state Supreme Courts that are really standouts that people are excited to clerk for include in Texas, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts. They're really great and strong state Supreme Courts across the country. One of my former interns at Southern Poverty Law Center, she clerked at the state Supreme Court in Alabama, and I think that was really rewarding for her in her career. So consider state Supreme Courts. In terms of state appellate courts, these are your intermediate appellate courts before you get to the Supreme Court for the state or the highest court for the state. And the jurisdiction for these appellate courts can also vary. For instance, in Alabama, where I live, our intermediate appellate courts are divided by type. So we have the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and the Alabama Court of Civil Appeals. If you're interested in clerking for one of the intermediate appellate courts, then you could consider, well, am I more interested in criminal or am I more interested in civil, and apply based on that. Other state intermediate appellate courts don't have that distinction. So, for instance, in Mississippi, where I'm from, the Mississippi Court of Appeals handles all types of cases, whether civil or criminal. And in terms of examples of state appellate courts that you might be interested in, really all of them are great and have a lot to offer. All of them need law clerks to help in drafting opinions for the intermediate appellate court. Um, I've heard really positive things about North Carolina. I know people who clerked at the intermediate appellate level there, and also Alabama. I've heard good things. State trial court, similarly, the jurisdiction can vary. Um, for instance, in Mississippi, where I'm from, at the lowest level of the state courts, the courts are divided by courts of law and courts of equity. So for instance, circuit court in Mississippi can handle, civil cases seeking monetary relief, um, criminal cases, but then you would go to chancery court in Mississippi for things like divorce, guardianship, um, guardian ad litem, and things like that. So when you're thinking about your trial court level in the state system, you should really consider what are you interested in. If you're interested in the future working in family law, then clerking for a family law court like the Chancery Court in Mississippi is something that could be really useful for you. Okay, now we're going to talk about the rewards and benefits of clerking. I would say the major reward of clerking at the federal level is familiarity with federal law and practice. The federal court system is complex. There are lots of rules and procedures to be aware of, but it's also very organized and generally efficient. And once you're comfortable with navigating those rules and processes, then it becomes a lot easier for you to work in that space. And that's why those federal clerkships are really desired, and they're really desirable in terms of hiring for firms, is because you already have that background and experience with federal practice. It can be really challenging sometimes for a lawyer if you've practiced only in state court, where things tend to be a little bit more relaxed and not as formal in terms of the rules, to then go practice in federal court and have to learn all these ways that the federal courts operate. If you already have that experience going into practice, then that can be really helpful for you. Clerkships also help you develop relationships in networks. An important relationship that you're going to develop is with the judge himself or herself. And, any judge has experience and advice that they can share with you about your own career. There are things to learn from them about how they work, how to approach the law, that will be invaluable to you in your career. And you also have the network of other people who also clerk for that same judge. And, they may not only be mentors for you, but potentially could be part of your network in advancing your own career going forward. So it's great to have those connections. And then in terms of career opportunities and benefits, some of this is just really tangible, the benefits of clerking. A lot of firms offer a clerkship bonus. Someone who's clerked to come work at the firm, they'll give you a bonus just based on the fact that you clerked before. And then even in terms of intangibles, it can mean a lot on your resume that you had clerked for a judge before. It shows that you've handled a lot of responsibility, that you were able to complete a term clerkship. So that's impressive in itself. And it speaks highly of your ability to write well and to analyze legal issues. And so definitely in my career, my career would not have developed the way it did without my clerkship experience. One thing I learned during clerking is about the federal defense system. I really didn't have much familiarity with the federal defender program before I was a clerk, but it inspired me to become an assistant federal defender. And that was a great experience for me. And that led me to my current role in Southern Poverty Law Center. So there are lots of benefits to clerking. And now I'm going to hand it over for questions and I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keisha, for all of your insight on clerkship roles and the processes to be mindful of when pursuing them. As you mentioned, we can now move on to questions. So, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, if you have questions that you'd like to ask Keisha, please feel free to submit them by clicking the Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen and submitting them there. It looks like we've already got a couple. So, our first question is, how can I make my clerkship application stand out if I don't necessarily have top grades or law review experience?
Well, I lean into the cover letter. That really is your introduction to the judge. And that also gives you an opportunity to explain anything that you think could be a deficit in terms of your application. So tell the judge why you're interested, not only in being a clerk, but clerking for that judge in particular. Research the judge's background. Are there things that you have in common in terms of your background? And then address head on in your cover letter anything that you think is an issue. If you had lower grades one semester, but that was because you were experiencing certain things in your life, loss of, a family member or something like that, address that in your cover letter. I'm a really strong candidate. You'll see, or you might notice in my transcript that, I fell back a little bit in terms of my grades one semester. That's because I was experiencing this. But since then, I've worked very diligently to pull up my grades. And I know that working for a judge like you, who shares a similar background to mine in whatever respect, would be very beneficial to me in the next phase of my career. And I promise to give my best work going forward and working with you, something like that.
Awesome. Thank you for those tips. Our next question is, what qualities do judges look for in a strong clerkship candidate beyond academic performance? So you kind of touched on that, but could you elaborate a little bit more?
Yes, I would say two things really stand out. Your work ethic, that you're willing to work hard and put in the time. Some of this with being a law clerk and being a judge, it just comes down to the details. Are you going to commit to being careful in the details? Are you going to commit to working hard to make sure everything goes smoothly for the judge? Judges don't like to be overruled. It's not a good feeling. It happens and it's necessary, but it's not a good feeling. So they don't want to make a lot of mistakes. They want to be able to rely on you to get to the right answer most of the time. Um, and then the other thing I would say is, are you a good person to work with? Are you collegial? Are you supportive? Are you able to work closely with multiple people in a small space? Chambers are small. If anybody in there is inconsiderate or loud or disrespectful, things will devolve rather quickly. They want to know that you're a good person to work with. And I would, focus on that in terms of my interview and my application.
Thank you. And this one is from a perspective more so about kind of lifestyle and what that looks like for clerkship. So this person asks for law students who are parents or maybe looking to start a family, how compatible do you think clerkship roles are with those kinds of lifestyle choices?
I think they are totally compatible, and they're even more compatible in these days that we live in because of the advances in technology. And my first child, my daughter, was born during my first clerkship. And the judge and everybody at the courthouse was really supportive and accommodating of my pregnancy. They had a big baby shower for me at the courthouse, which I still really appreciate. And so I think they are supportive. It's about just managing your time, making sure the judge is informed, and definitely in having remote workability in the way that we do now. Having a clerkship and having a family is even more accommodating. It's even more possible to do without disruption than it was when I clerked, 15 years ago.
Okay, awesome. So our next question is, would you recommend applying across the country in hopes of landing a more lucrative clerkship with a federal judge, or more so tailoring your applications to a specific circuit that you might be practicing in afterward?
I would honestly encourage you to apply broadly. Not necessarily apply to everywhere and everybody. If you're really firm that you want to be in a particular place, then just apply there. But if you're open-minded, I would apply to a few different places and then see what works. I think the federal clerkships are really important and helpful. But if you want to start out with your first clerkship being at a state court that's nearer to you, and then while you're there, applying to federal clerkships maybe elsewhere or across the country, that's totally feasible. The former intern that I mentioned who worked for the state Supreme Court here in Alabama. After that, she worked for a magistrate judge in Pensacola, Florida. After that, she worked for the judge on the Fifth Circuit that I clerked for, Judge Stewart. So you really can move around, and it's about gaining experience that's useful for you.
Awesome. Thanks for that perspective. I think we have time for a couple more questions if that's okay for you. Okay, awesome. Our next question is, are there any strategies for obtaining a clerkship if I'm not applying through the traditional OCI route? So on-campus interviewing.
Yes, totally. Like I said, with Oscar, the federal hiring plan, that's only for while you're currently a law student. So, if you're interested in like working for a while and then going back into being a law clerk, I know lots of people who maybe did a fellowship for their first 2 years and then applied to a clerkship after that, or they feel I didn't get practical experience in law school, so let me do that first and then I can be a clerk. That's totally fine, and you wouldn't need to apply in the traditional route. You would just submit your application in your own schedule, according to your own schedule later.
Awesome. Thank you. And then our last question for today is, what are some tips that you have or the best way that you think there is to approach writing samples and letters of recommendation for my application?
Okay, I would say writing sample. You definitely want a sample where you do some thorough legal analysis. Some amount of factual background is helpful. Um, if it's a motion that you worked on or a legal memo, usually there's a factual background that's in there. Sometimes when you do like a note for a law review, they're not maybe a lot of facts involved because it's not a court motion, it's not a legal research memo, but you should thoroughly present what the issue is. Like, why is this note warranted? Usually it's speaking to something that the author thinks is important in terms of a legal issue. And then you want to have a thorough legal analysis that includes maybe some exploration of case precedent or statutes, and then some sort of resolution. In a memo, you're recommending to a firm that they take some sort of action, or in an actual, if you were able to work as an extern for a judge, you might have even drafted orders or something like that where there's a resolution that the judge is taking. So for the writing sample, you just wanted to be a thorough legal analysis. What was the other part of the question, Nina? I'm sorry, I forgot it.
No, that's okay. That was with regard to also letters of recommendation. Like maybe who would you choose? How would you go about that?
Okay, I would make sure you choose your letters from someone who actually knows you and can speak to your writing ability, but probably more importantly, the type of person that you are. And it's definitely important to include professors as references. You know, you have 2 to 3 recommendation letters. So if you submit 3, probably 2 of those are going to be from your professor, but then it's also good to have a professional reference. So that's an attorney or partner at a law firm that you worked with or something like that who can talk about your work ethic and your work performance in a way that your professors generally won't be able to.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering all of our audience questions. And thank you all for submitting all of those wonderful questions as well. We want to thank you for joining us for another Justia webinar. As I mentioned at the top of today's presentation, law students, we do have a great career resource for you. In addition to our career webinars programs, we have a growing suite of services to help you succeed in your job search. Justia Legal Jobs is a comprehensive legal job board with thousands of opportunities across America, as well as remote work. So you can get started with your search by going to justia.jobs. While you're searching for jobs, you can also sign up for our free legal jobs newsletter, which features in-house counsel roles at leading companies, public interest jobs, and more for you to take a look at. And if you are a lawyer and you're looking for new legal talent, as a Justia Connect member, you can also post jobs on Justia Legal Jobs. So if you're looking for new staff, that is a great place to start. Thank you all so much for joining and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.